Welcome to Musicians versus the World, the podcast where we explore aspects of music and musician life that may not have been covered in music school. I am your host, Christine Smith, and today we are talking about how a composer needs to function as part of the storytelling team in the world of film and television production. We'll be talking about strategies that you can use as a composer to help support your message, transport your audience into different settings, and even foreshadow key narrative events. My guest today is composer Jason Brandt. Jason Brandt recently composed music for the film Camp Hideout, starring Christopher Lloyd and Corbin Bleu, which was released in September 2023. Jason also scored the award-winning film Max Winslow and the House of Secrets, starring Chad Michael Murray, F.R.E.D.I, starring Kelly Hu, and Christmas Wonderland. Other films include the thrillers Mommy Be Mine and The Other Mother, A Christmas Reunion, Night of the Living Dead 3D, and the documentary That Guy Dick Miller premiered at South by Southwest 2014. Jason also creates original music for a wide range of national television programming, including Cartoon Network's Teen Titans Go, Mike Tyson's Mysteries, Extra, and TMZ. Other TV shows include American Idol, The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, and many more. So Jason Brandt, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Musicians versus the World.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you. I love reading about your background. You have background in jazz and composing, in rock, classical. It seems like you are very well versed in a wide variety of genres. How did you get interested in music in general?
When I was a kid, my mom started me off in piano lessons. I want to say I was 4, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there. And it didn't take right away. It just took a minute. So I want to say around 1986, my mom finally got cable TV for the family, and MTV was there, and everything I'd been hearing about. Suddenly, all of that was interesting, and then I had to have drum lessons. And then about 2 years later, I had to have guitar lessons. And then I didn't like piano lessons when I was younger, but then I came right back to it and learned to love all that. And then just experimenting, learning a lot with film music. When I first saw Star Wars when I was a kid, everyone, that was a mic drop moment for, I think the entire planet was just like, what's that? Mm-hmm. And I remember I had my Aunt Dinah, she had a 8-track and she would play it in her car and we'd drive around and listening to that, but it was an electronic version of it. So it was a little different than the orchestral version, but both versions of these things were mind blowing to me. And years later, I remember seeing movies like Dance with Wolves and Silence of the Lambs, and my first 3 soundtracks was definitely Star Wars, and then Dance with Wolves, which is John Barry, and then Silence of the Lambs by Howard Shore. And I just started to realize like that type of music is telling a story. Like I was really impressed with that idea of how music can shift and change and move around and tell something of a narrative.
And I think about like when MTV first came out, all of those music videos really was storytelling. Do you feel like that kind of starting out with MTV and then noticing, do you think that kind of sets you up for the storytelling in film scores?
I think it worked its way eventually. The bigger story is when I was a kid, I mean, that all led to me, playing guitar and drums and piano and all these different instruments. And I really wanted to, be Eddie Van Halen and Steve Vai and all these great guitar players. And then the world changed when Nirvana came along, and a lot of that music kind of died. And I was like, oh, wow, the whole world can shift from one artist thing. And at a certain point, now we've seen the world change many times, where they favor certain things, and then guitar-driven rock isn't as popular now as it was back then. And now you have more female singers doing, things over 808s and other fancy trickery in the studio. So it's just interesting. And I realized, well, maybe I don't want to just do that for the rest of my life. And film music and music for media generally created this window to where I could do anything. So all that rock stuff I did will have a home. All that classical stuff will have a home. All that jazz stuff will have a home. All of this now has become choices for when I'm telling a narrative in a movie or in a TV show or a commercial or whatever it is. So all this has really helped my education and just falling in love with music and all these different styles. Like, because Stravinsky and Metallica have some things in common. Like there's a certain intensity, a certain thing that they're doing. And if you listen to Mars, Bringer of War, I'm hearing, early Black Sabbath borrowing from that and other. It's very interesting how, and then you get to Star Wars, they're like, well, that guy's borrowing from Holst as well.
Yeah.
You start to realize how everyone's borrowing from these great classical artists. So I started to just kind of piecemeal it and go back to the source. I'm like, all right, who are these old guys? And then just getting to finally see it on paper, seeing scores and doing piano reductions and getting a better sense of this. I mean, the world is so beautiful when you're seeing it through music, and especially in a historic lens, when you go back 500 years of classical music and, looking at, Gregorian chant going into Baroque and then classical period and then Romantic and then 20th century stuff. And then all the variations with that, with Impressionism and then where we are, what we're doing now. I mean, it's just fascinating, and there's you'll never be bored if you study music and you keep going into it. So I don't remember what the original question is, but I love music. And that's why I love music.
I love that. And that's why you love music. Did you find all of that connection between Stravinsky and Black Sabbath? Did you find that on your own, or did someone point that out to you?
So I feel like some of this I learned through interviews, just by being curious and learning. But anytime, like we're doing interviews now, like you and I could talk about our influences and what makes you tick. How did you come to do this, and why are you doing it? And, we'll name check a bunch of artists, and then hopefully whoever's listening will go, okay, I'll check out all of them. And there's a real lesson in that. And so that's kind of how I piecemealed some of that, and just analyzing it and realizing that there is something aggressive about Rite of Spring, when Stravinsky did it. It's interesting to note, which is impossible to imagine, that in 1910 or 1920, where it was, when Stravinsky did this huge ballet called Rite of Spring, there was a riot. Can you imagine classical music and then people rioting and going, no, it's crazy. And there's dancers flying around and they're like, no, that's not how to... It's hard to imagine that. But that was him, freeing himself from the shackles of certain harmonies and certain rhythms and certain everything. And all of that kind of informs later music. And so some of it's through interviews, but a lot of it's just, going to school and reading and just constantly being curious.
Your first compositions were using a simple 4-track machine. Can you walk us through how you got started composing?
Yes. Okay. So one of my favorite guitar players, his name is Sid Haig. He had an album called Passion and Warfare, and I fell in love with this thing. I mean, it's not a regular guitar album. It's more of a huge composition with guitars, and it's just very layered. And I was like, wow, how does he do that? I love listening to music or seeing a movie and saying the word wow, just going, oh, wow, how they do that. And then you immediately you listen, you just can't imagine how they did it. And so I'm reading interviews with him and, learning about his favorite guitar players like Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and all these others. But then also learning that at some point he got a 4-track recorder or an 8-track recorder, and he just started doing his own compositions. And I just thought, well, that's amazing. And that technology was there in the early 90s. And so basically you get a 4-track recorder, you put in a cassette tape. We don't have that anymore, and it would, you could just put it in and record 3 tracks and then bounce it onto the 4th track. Then you have to delete those 3 tracks and you record 2 tracks and then bounce it onto that. And you can get up to 7. The lesson in that is that it requires you to know your composition. You can't improvise too much. Like now it's really common to see a kid play guitar on a looper. He does, 2-bar riffs or 4-bar riff, and then he paints on top of that, and then on top of that, and that. And that's cool, but this is different where, you have to create an ABA and all this, or whatever your form of the piece is. And then I had a drum machine, I had a bass guitar, and then I would layer it with either guitars or the synthesizer I had, which would go straight in. And it allowed lots of choices. And so my early compositions, I want to say it was almost exclusively rock-based, just because that was kind of where my head was at. But then I circled back and got a classical education and still did that process, sometimes with a 4-track recorder. Now we have, I use Digital Performer now, and I have lots of friends that use Logic and a bunch of other stuff, and Pro Tools. And now that's readily available. It's totally easy. Right. But back then, it was analog. And it was a real challenge to just do that. So I remember in the summer of, I think, 92, I made a decision that I'm going to write one piece of music every single day in the summer and not play for anybody. What that did is it freed me to suck, to be terrible, and just keep it in there. But it's still charming. Like I haven't listened to it in about 10, 15 years, but because I don't know where my cassette player is, but all of that's fascinating. It just gave me a chance to fail and try something new, and then go through that process of, writing riffs or ideas and doing sketching. The way I did sketching is write a guitar riff and then play it into a recording, like another tape deck, and then listen to it and pick and choose and then piecemeal that to get together, and then maybe put a guitar solo over or put a keyboard part or some horns or whatever I wanted. But all of that experimentation and just gave me a chance to create a little universe. every day. Just, and the rule was it could be as short as a minute and as long as I want, but I had to do it every day.
Wow, that is amazing. So you were how old when you started doing that? A teenager?
Yeah, I was a teenager, yeah.
That's incredible. Like how much that you had so much passion and you knew what you loved at such a young age. That's really, really impressive. Do you miss those analog days now that everything can be so perfect in our digital world? Do you miss those days when things just were like a little bit not perfect?
My favorite joke is, before we had Pro Tools, we had pros. Like, I love that old joke because you had to know your parts backwards and forwards. You had to do it. And all those guys, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, the big band guys, all those Frank Sinatra players, every classical musician, they're doing it live. They're doing it amazing on the first take. And then the second take is just a slightly different choice, but they really brought it. But I think it's also important to support new instrument makers, new artists. Let's not just stay in the past. Let's build on top of that. We're all standing on the shoulders of greatness.
Absolutely.
Of our favorite people. So I love looking backwards and having some things, but I don't miss those limitations of that. I think it was important to have it in that time. It helped me grow for sure, but
yeah,
but I don't know. Maybe it made me stronger and tougher. I don't know. Maybe I'd be weaker. I don't know. It's a good argument.
So do you see any new tools that are coming out that you think are going to really help push music forward or composition forward?
AI could either be great or terrible.
I was wondering
what could go either way.
Yeah, the jury's still out on that one.
So humans will still have to work with AI. I think AI has a limitation for sure in that it's working with all of our best ideas. It's not creating anything new. It's just working with all of our stuff. So that could be great or it could be terrible. I don't know. Let's do this interview again in 5 years and go.
Right. We'll see how we'll fact check, see how it all turns out. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk about the main topic that we're going to talk about today, which is music's role. I love just hearing your whole philosophy on music and how it's beautiful and how it's so interconnected. And one of the things that I love about music, especially when it's for media and especially the works that you've done, is it can take a listener or a viewer or someone who's experiencing, and it can transport them to some other place. And it can set the scene for things. And your work, especially your most recent work, I think has done a beautiful job in that. And I would love to talk a little bit about it. So Camp Hideout is a new-ish sort of film that you've been working on. And that's a great example of how the music is used to subconsciously take the audience into summer camp. And so I would love to hear how you did that and what you think is so strong about music's pull in getting us and transporting us somewhere else.
I heard this great quote not long ago. It was talking about why is music powerful? Why does that work? And this is an interesting quote. It's music triggers powerful emotions, positive and negative, via autobiographical memories, usually through nostalgia. So we're all chasing our childhood. We're all like, the first time, where were you when you heard Star Wars? Where were you when you heard your favorite artist? Where were you? And same thing with food. We do that with food and movies. And, you get depressed and you're like, I want to go back to that. And it's fascinating to just hear how people keep revisiting that and doing that. So when it came to Camp Hideout, my director, he's brilliant. His name is Sean Robert Olson. He and I are about the same age. We grew up on all the same movies. And this movie has Christopher Lloyd in it. So right out of the gate, the bar is raised. He was in Back to the Future. He was in Addams Family. He was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Please watch all of these movies. He also, in that same period of time, is Spielberg and Richard Donner and George Lucas and so many others. So right there, we know that we're playing with something that will trigger certain emotions going to the past, because this is kind of a love letter to our childhood and what we went through. And so we want to pay an homage to all of that. So he's doing that with the camera, with the editing, with the sound design, all these elements in filmmaking. And then I doing it, originally, we had a temp score that was Williams, Silvestri, and stuff like that, but it wasn't quite fitting. It did feel a little dated. It didn't feel as diegetic as it totally should. So I made a decision to talk with the director about it, because I did a few versions of where we were trying to going down this route. And it seemed to me that maybe we should try to do something more of what we're seeing on screen. So when you go to camp, I mean, a lot of us have gone to camp. Have you ever gone to camp when you were a kid?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, right. So there's a lot of singing. There's a lot of clapping and, whistling and acoustic guitars and chanting and, all these little fun little instruments. And I remember even like the little fish, the gyro, where you're scratching and doing stuff like that. So I thought it'd be fun to incorporate all these fun little instruments that are there and then include that in the melodic ideas, have lots of different types of guitars in there, but then also have that orchestral element. Orchestra for a lot of us is just timeless. You need it. It can sneak in and out of scenes very, very well. And so I just really felt like to get into the heart of what each one of these characters is, I wanted to build like a little tone for each one of them. So the main character, his name is Noah, and he's played by Ethan Drew. And he's this kid that is having a hard time. He's basically stolen something. He's running with certain criminals, and he's trying to get away from some bad guys. And so he hides out in a camp. So he's hiding out in the camp, and he thinks he's cool. He thinks he's amazing. So I decided to treat him like he's kind of a retro funk character. Uh-huh. He's kind of on the edge, and he's always running. So his stuff is kind of, high action, but also kind of Ocean's 11, kind of Pulp Fiction or Jackie Brown, that kind of thing. Very kind of cool. And then also a little bit of spy because he's sneaking around, he's doing stuff with his friends. So he and then all those friends kind of have that theme. Another character in there is Jake. He's with a camp leader, and he's kind of the Yoda of the film, if you will. He's kind of got more of a spiritual quality to him. And so he's got a centered thing, and he's more calm, but he's there for wisdom. And so his theme plays a certain way, and I wanted, that's going to be, because he's actually singing and playing guitar in the movie. He does a great job. So I knew that, more singing, more guitars, things like that will be there. And then when Christopher Lloyd hits the big screen, I mean, he's amazing. He's a legend, and it makes me nervous, even writing music for him, but I'm totally going to do this because it's totally going to be amazing. So he's playing a heavyweight guy. He's the, kind of the bad guy for a while in there. And so he's got dark rooting strings. He's got a military background. He's very strict. He runs the camp a certain way, and if you cross him, he's coming for you. And he's going to take your technology. He's going to take whatever it is. And so I had to treat his character differently. So I'm going across, creating this universe musically of each character. And what's nice about this film too is it's more melodic. There's more room for that in something like this. There's lots of room to experiment and have fun. And there's even like towards the end of the movie, there's kind of like a spaghetti western thing happening between these two villains that are chasing Noah. Yeah. And they have their own theme too. And so I'm interweaving all this stuff. So after I've made enough choices, I've got a bunch of piano drafts, and then good film music is good storytelling. You want to set things up, you want to pay it off, you want to have certain pacing throughout, set a tone, you want to do all these things. And to really grab people, how do you talk about that when this person realizes I've been going the wrong way my whole life and now I'm going to go this way? That's a big spiritual moment, so you want to treat all of that. So all of this, it was great to have this great conversation with my director, who's also a 4-time Emmy award-winning editor who knows all the ins and outs of all this type of filmmaking. He was totally open to these creative discussions and going, okay, let's do a different route than what we had at the time. We discarded all that and with this new direction. And so this score really encapsulates, it's unique to just this film. It's kind of whispering to the viewer what's going on, and it's cueing you into certain things. And it's sometimes working with you, other times working against you on purpose. But it's all storytelling, and there's a lot of thought going into it. And I tried to make it as unique to this film as I possibly could. Yeah. Yeah. Was it difficult when you have all of these different themes and all these different, genres and styles? Was it hard to make it seem cohesive? How did you do that? It was, but one of the things is, this isn't something I was worried about at the beginning of my film scoring career, but now I think about it all the time is, when does your ear get tired? Like, if you repeat something long enough, like a certain melody or a certain motif, or, if you're in the same key for too long, when do you get tired of that? And this film is unusual that it allows all this movement, because normally you wouldn't get that in other films. Normally you have one ensemble and you stick with it the whole way through, or you're just creating a different one. Some guys like Bernard Herrmann, who did Psycho and Sisters, all these Hitchcock films, he would just create different ensembles every time. It would be like alto flutes, like a series of those with, a vibraphone with a rotary, and just do a whole cue like that, and maybe some whistling or something crazy. Yeah. But, you make it work. You want to tell a story through the music, And I definitely like moving around and just finding a new way, just whatever it takes to get the viewer to be excited. So part of your game as a composer now is to grab their attention. Everything's faster, quicker. We get bored quicker. We're like, what else you got? What else you got? What else you got? And getting people to sit down for 90 minutes to 2 hours is a little more challenging now. And the music, plays a factor in all these things. So for me to make it all connect was a lot of fun to try to do that and pass around through these different ensembles and making it work. And it does work. If you get a chance to see it, it's totally worth your time.
Yeah. And that works really, really well. Because it is a very high energy sort of film. And so with the music matching that, then that works really well. You had mentioned that music in storytelling, it has a setup and then a resolution. Do you have an example of one of the themes that you did that with, that you had a setup and you kind of worked it through and then finally resolved it?
Yeah, all the characters, I tried my best to, they all have a theme. There's about 4 or 5 themes specifically, and then they all have their own resolution at the end of the movie. Some are more clear than others because the story is Noah.
Right.
It's really about him, and then the secondary characters kind of play into that. So his theme starts off as this very fast guitar-based thing, and then, so it's set up a certain thing. It just moves. It's cooking. Because, the opening shot of him, the introduction of his character, is him, running in. He's out of focus, and then suddenly he's in focus and it turns out he's running away from a security guard because he stole something. And he's running, and that's the whole opening scene. That's how you learn about his character. Is like, oh, he's on the run. You don't know exactly who he is, what's going on, but that theme, by the time you get to the end of the movie, pays off very nicely because it turns out that his parents had died, and he's adopted. And there's a lot of issues he's running with, and he doesn't, he's the cool guy. He doesn't want to connect with anybody. He's just keeping things at a surface level. And so he finally opens up. It takes the whole movie to do this. And I'm not giving anything away by saying that, there is a change in there.
Yeah.
And then that's what it is. So I would say his theme, there's a couple other themes that just have this point where, especially even the opening title, I have this thing where the movie starts off and you see them all getting ready to meet certain characters. You're introducing them. But by the time they go off and they're all friends, they're tighter because of this whole experience over 90 minutes. Now that music just plays different. It's a little warmer. It's a little more touchy-feely and a little more connective. And so you're handing it off and saying, because, this music is kind of helping the sermon of, what we're saying. And I really tried hard to do that throughout the movie, where you have little setups and payoffs. Music is part of that storytelling narrative. And there's many ways to do that, but that's one of my favorite things in trying to do it subtly, but it's important. It's there. The listener doesn't always know what it is, but it's part of that subtext. And, the music's kind of whispering to you about the story going on. And it's one of my favorite things about film music.
Yeah. The subtlety is amazing, and how everything is very subconscious. That's one of the most beautiful things about music, whatever genre it is that you're talking about. There's always these little subtleties that you just don't really realize until you kind of dig into the weeds with it. Another one of your projects that you did this, and I loved the subtlety, was Max Winslow in the House of Secrets. You did so much foreshadowing with the music in that. I thought it was great. Can you explain a little bit about what you did with the music in that project?
Sure. That movie was a blast. That was a really great movie. That was another one with Sean. And I remember I got to see some rough cuts of that movie, and I had, everyone's curious, like, what do you think? What do you think? And there's a character named Atticus Virtue. He's this guy that's kind of like hovering over the whole movie the whole time. And so the first time you meet him, you see him in a classroom, and you don't really know who he is. And so I was talking to the director, is there any way you could do this setup where you're really building him up? He's this rich billionaire. He started from this high school, and now he's very successful, and he wants to do something. He's giving away a mansion if you can get through his maze of stuff. And so there's all this tech stuff. So in that conversation, Sean, being the brilliant editor he is, the brilliant director, he was able to piecemeal all this stuff and create a 2-minute foreshadow of who Atticus Virtue is. So the first time you see him, he steps out and you meet him, you know who he is. He's this brilliant guy that you're lucky to even be talking to. He's like an Elon Musk, but you wouldn't have known that earlier. And so we knew, because it's tech-based, that the music needs to have some reflective quality of that. Of course, orchestra's going to play in it, but the tech factor was a thread throughout the whole movie. And so that was another thing where I didn't want to get lost in just pads and ambience and poles. So there are certain tech aspects, but then I included a lot of percussion. It's good to kind of have like interesting drums underneath it that pushes it forward. Mm-hmm. But that opening, because you're introducing this billionaire, but you don't know if he's a good guy or if he's a bad guy. You don't really know. Mm-hmm. And so there had to be some ambiguity with that tech. So you had to feel 2 or 3 feelings at a time. And so I wanted to start a little darker just so you didn't know you had an edge. You didn't fully trust him. But they're pitching him as like this brilliant guy, but maybe there's a dark side. You want to figure out that. And that was a conversation with the director, of course. And and the writer, Jeff Wild, he was helpful too in his different processes.
Yeah. Yeah. I just love it. I think it's so great. Do your kids, you'd mentioned you have two kids.
I do.
Do they watch the films and the projects that you work on?
Yes. I have 2 brilliant children, Christopher, who is almost 10, and Liam, who just had a birthday, age 8. Shout out to them. I love you guys. What was great is we did 2 screenings of Camp Hideout. Unfortunately, we're in the middle of we just got through the pandemic. We're like, yeah, we can work again. And then the actor strike and the writer strike.
Right.
So we had this big premiere planned, and then unfortunately the actors couldn't participate because they have to honor those things. So we didn't get to do the big premiere that we had hoped for. I think there was going to be one in Nashville and one in LA, and it would have been amazing. Mm-hmm. So we did a smaller one. So we did one for cast and crew, which my kids came to. And then I took them to the theater so they could see it live here in Burbank. And both times, they laughed out loud. They had a blast. We have a bunch of video of them. Like, their reactions were priceless because in the end, you're not making this movie for adults per se. So they've seen that. They really like that one. They saw F.R.E.D.I, which is another one. They really like that one. And then I showed them, this is funny and sad at the same time, there was a movie I did years ago called The Dog Who Saved Summer, which was a sequel to a movie called The Dog Who Saved Easter. Mm-hmm. My Christopher was just a baby, so he's in that movie of The Dog Who Saved Summer. And my wife is pregnant, so she's in it briefly, so Liam's kind of in it. So we're showing the movie to them, and we're like, look, there's Christopher. And Liam immediately wants to know, well, where am I? And I'm like, well, you're not born yet. You're in there. And the last 30 minutes of the movie, he doesn't even watch because he's so upset that he's not in the movie. He's crying. He's like, why are you not in the movie? I'm like, you're in the movie, kind of, but you're not born yet. It's complicated. And then there was another movie that we did right after that. It was called Christmas Wonderland. I think that was it. Or there's another Christmas movie. And same thing. My wife's still pregnant, almost about to give birth. And then Christopher's in there. And I even showed them that based on that experience.
Like, now you're not seeing
the other thing is, we made this terrible decision to not have our kid, Christopher, have a haircut right away. We just didn't give him a haircut for a year or so. And it's reflective. It didn't age well. I don't know if I'm ever showing that. Kids, I love you. Please forgive me if you see the movie, if you even see this interview. So, yes, they've seen some. I don't know if I'm going to see all of it. There'll be a disclaimer before I show anything. And just, please don't be bad. And every time, Sean makes a movie, or any director, I'm like, if you're shooting in LA, is there going to include them? I have to do a makeup and get...
Because he wasn't quite born yet, so you're going to have to do that for the rest of his life.
Right. It's hard to explain, like, you're in the movie, kind of. You're just not there yet. And then sure enough, we didn't shoot as many movies in LA, went to Utah, that's where you shoot a lot of Christmas movies now.
Yeah.
And then, Arkansas, both F.R.E.D.I and Max Winslow, and I think a big chunk of Camp Hideout was shot in Arkansas, which is a great place to shoot movies and to do that. But we're nowhere near there, and I can't take them out of school to fly out and do something. What kind of dad am I if I do that? So you just have to weigh this. So
yeah.
So there you go.
There you go.
They have seen it.
They'll forgive you someday. I'm sure they will.
I think so.
Well, Jason, it has been so much fun chatting with you. As we finish up, do you have any last minute advice for any aspiring musicians or aspiring composers that we haven't talked about yet?
I have tons of advice. I've been doing this for about 20, 25 years professionally. And, the first thing is please know that writing great music or being a great musician, that's only half of it. That's only half. That's assumed that you are. The other half is, the business side of it. You're going to have to learn how to network. You're going to have to be fun to work with. You have to be charming. You have to take notes well. And remember, you're part of a creative process. This isn't just about you. If that is just about you, that's a separate project. You can make your solo album anytime you want. But when you're doing a movie, it's about the story. The story is king. And everyone in, the cinematographer, is focused on the story. The editor is focused on the story. The actors are focused on that. No one gets to do just anything they want. So that's a big part of it. Is just know that you're part of a bigger team telling a bigger story, and just have a really good attitude about it. Relationships are key in every industry. And, it's worth noting that, John Williams and Steven Spielberg have worked together on tons and tons of films over 40, 50 years. Those relationships, that it's an amazing thing. If there's any filmmakers watching this, I want you to know that composers are collaborators. They're also storytellers. And you didn't write your screenplay right away. You had to do rewrites on that. Same thing with the music. There will occasionally have to be some rewrites to tailor it, to get it just right. And to have patience. Things don't always work. I feel like music is sort of an afterthought for a lot of people, and music is incredibly important. I came out here with a dream of just doing film, and then the world changed, and I do more in television now because Teen Titans Go, there's more episodes there. And we view things differently, especially after 2020. We're not going to movie theaters as much. So, we're watching more on the internet, more on television. It's just a different world. And so you're going to have to keep changing, have a good attitude about that, and just keep working towards that. And then the last thing, I remember Christopher Young, he's a famous composer that I got to study under with. He's a film composer that I absolutely love. And he said something amazing that stuck with me. He said, Hollywood is a land of dreams, but it's also a land of broken dreams. Meaning, there are some people out there that just don't want to see you succeed. You need to have an antenna and focus on reading who's your ally and who isn't, who's supporting you and who's not. Because some people will support you for a while until you get to a certain point, and then like, oh, you're not qualified for that. You can't. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Take the risk. It's okay to be afraid and to do things and get out of your comfort zone and to do stuff. Because, if you don't, you'll always be that person that didn't try that thing. You'll never know how good you were. If you tried something and you failed, that's a more interesting story than, well, I never tried. I had a dream and I didn't try. Don't do that. Get out there, try it. If you feel like you need to get a degree in this, or you need to move to LA or Nashville, whatever your thing is, do it. This is part of your story. And I wish you well. I hope you do well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jason. It's been such a joy chatting with you. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you.
It's been fun.
Yeah, I appreciate you talking with me.